the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Rossinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go in to the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Please remember to download the Veritas Catholic Radio Network mobile app so that you could have access to all of our station's content. And as always, we ask you to please, wherever you see Joe and I on social media, primarily on Facebook, even though, Joe, I think we got another strike, but what are you going to do? So we're suspended for a week, but we are on YouTube at the Frontline TV, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. And we always appreciate your support today. And we're taking, usually, everybody knows out there, we usually are having a conversation with an author who has a book or different things going on. Today, we are having what we believe to be a very important conversation. And we as Catholics need to know about it, because anything that's going on in the world that's just what you would call evil, because it is evil, is something that we're going to talk about on this show. And today we are very pleased and honored to be joined by Salih Hudayar. And he is going to be joining us to talk about the plight of the Uyghur community and the East Turkestani diaspora. And some of you might have seen Salih on social media. He is doing a lot of interviews. Having said that, I just want to give a brief introduction. Salih Hudayar was elected as the Prime Minister of the East Turkestan government in exile on November 11, 2019. He was born to a Uyghur business family in Atush, East Turkestan. He studied international studies and politics at the University of Oklahoma and was a member of the Army National Guard from 2011 to 2013. And he is currently pursuing a master's in national security studies from the American Military University. On June 4th, 2000, Salih Hudayar fled to the United States with his family, where they became political refugees. He grew up in Oklahoma, and despite being so young, he began to spread awareness about East Turkestan and the situation there. He is fluent in Uyghur, Turkish, and English. He is married and currently resides with his wife in Northern Virginia. Salih Hudayar, welcome to the Front Line with Joe and Joe.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. With that, I'll hand it over to Joe and we'll begin the conversation.
Prime Minister, it's our custom to always begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, before you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us. Amen. Name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Prime Minister, first and foremost, thank you for coming on. I think this is, as Joe said, a very important conversation, one that does not get enough press, particularly in the United States, and should, and hopefully we'll explore the reasons why it doesn't get that type of coverage. But I think as a good starting point, let's just give our listeners a little background on the Uyghur community and the East Turkestani diaspora. I think many people may not be aware of it. They should be, and I think it's a good starting block to build on our conversation.
So the Uyghurs are an ethnically Turkic people who have lived in Central Asia for at least 5,000 to 6,000 years. They are the local inhabitants of East Turkestan, the Chinese occupied in 1949 and renamed to Xinjiang, meaning the new territory or new colony. The Uyghurs, historically, they have practiced numerous religions, including shamanism, Buddhism. For about a couple of hundred years, they were Nestorian Christians. And then after they were Nestorian Christians, they embraced Islam, and predominantly most Uyghurs today are Muslim, though there are small minority populations of Uyghurs who are still either shamans, Buddhists, or even Christians.
Okay, thanks for the background, Prime. Let's dive it a little bit. As I said in the introduction, we go into the breach here, okay? And I don't know why, or maybe we can explore the reasons, or you could give some opinions why, some atrocities in the world, they get attention, and others unfortunately do not. And if evil is being committed, oppression, murder, all these things, and we're going to expose it, or at least you would think in America we should, and we don't, because we don't have a fair press. Having said that, Chinese authorities, okay, they have been accused of imposing forced labor, mass internment, forced birth control, erasing Uyghur cultural and religious identity, and separating children from their incarcerated parents. Is that just a couple of Italian guys from New Jersey, right-wing conspiracy theory, or is that actually what's going on? Can you elaborate on these human rights violations?
Yes, these are all things that are going on. This is actually stuff that the Chinese government has been implementing for decades, but the situation got worse starting in May of 2014 when Xi Jinping went to visit East Turkestan in May of 2014. In fact, just the other day, he went to visit East Turkestan for the first time in 8 years. And many people were shocked. What is he doing here? Last time he went there, this is when China launched its People's War campaign against so-called extremism, separatism, terrorism. And using that excuse, the Chinese government began to mass intern, according to the US Department of Defense, upwards of at least 3 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Turkic peoples. This time, the Xi Jinping went to oversee, how his directives were implemented. In addition to that, he made a couple of statements stating that they are going to continue with normalize this security presence there, and they're going to continue giving funding for more concentration camps. So what's happening in East Turkestan essentially is, since 1949, at the time of the Chinese occupation of East Turkestan, the Chinese population made less than 4% of the population of East Turkestan, and that was mostly the Chinese soldiers and their families that had been sent to colonize East Turkestan. Over the decades, as a result of state-sponsored colonization, the Chinese population began to grow, and the Chinese government began to impose population control policies initially, including forced abortions, birth control. The Chinese government themselves, their own documents state that between 1979 and 2009, they prevented, quote, 3.7 million illegal births, end quote, in East Turkestan. They murdered 3.7 million babies in the course of 3 decades. In addition to that, women are being sterilized, especially women, who had, 1 or 2 more children. After that, they're being sterilized by the Chinese government. In addition to that, you have young, unmarried Uyghur and other Turkic women being forcibly married to Chinese men in essence to breed out our population. You have our men who are being sterilized as well, but they're being sent into the prisons and into the concentration camps as terrorists, extremists, and they're being killed for their organs. Their organs are being sold to, unfortunately, wealthy Muslims across the world as, quote, halal organs. And this is the situation. The Chinese government themselves stated that they, forcibly connected the DNA, voice prints, and retina scans of 36 million people between the ages of 12 and 65 in East Turkestan between 2016 and 2017. And this, they're using this to match, the donors, or to match they need for, their organ market. On top of that, you mentioned the children. The Chinese government themselves stated that they separated 850,000 Uyghur and other Turkic children from their families and sent them to state-run boarding schools and orphanages to be raised as loyal atheist Chinese citizens, keeping them away from their culture, keeping them away from their religion, and essentially worshiping the Chinese Communist Party as God, because that's what the Chinese Communist Party views itself. There's no higher being than the Chinese Communist Party, and they're instilling them with the Chinese fascism, fascist ideology. So when they grow up, their own culture, they hate their own people, and essentially embrace and become Chinese.
It amazes me how we in America don't open our eyes to this. I honestly, Prime Minister, it bothers me to my core and I'm sure we're going to get into it in the questions in the conversation. How Americans just give this regime a pass. I mean, to me, Xi Jinping is no different than Mao. What? A little different. Wears a suit instead of like I really am bothered, and that's why we're so grateful that Prime Minister Salih Hudayar is on the show at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network to expose in our own little way here, Prime Minister, as best we can, and to try to reach a wider audience. People need to start shaming American companies, and we'll get into that in a little bit, to stop doing business with this regime. Again, whether they're going to crumble over that is one thing. I don't think they will, but at the very least, I don't understand why we have to do business with them and give them our money, particularly in light of all the things that you're bringing to light. With that, I don't want to go off on a rant. Joe Resinello.
A lot of times, governments, if you look at history, Prime Minister, obviously they paint their lies to cover up what they're doing. And in this particular case, the Chinese authorities are saying that these camps are re-educational vocational schools. Now, we know that that's a lie. I'd like for you to respond to it, because one of the things Joe and I try to do is expose lies. We've seen similar actions by Stalin. In his gulags, re-education. Solzhenitsyn has
the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge.
That was exactly same thing. And history obviously has painted those lies and actual atrocities for what they actually are. Please, dispel this myth.
Yes, so the Chinese government claims that these are vocational training and re-education centers. The part of the thing is that they're claiming that, they're de-radicalizing our people. They are providing them with, vocational training and jobs. And when you look at it, many of the people, especially the first type of people that they targeted, was our intellectuals. Our intellectuals, our religious leaders, our wealthy businessmen and women, all of them were targeted. These are people who don't need to be, quote, re-educated. They're not ignorant. Many of these people are very successful people. You had doctors, lawyers, journalists, scholars, all of them being sent saying that they need to work and become re-educated. No, that's not the case here. The Chinese government is just simply using this as the case to round up our people and deprive our nation of our the most worthy people in our diaspora, in our community, who are able to uplift our people. So you have all of our wealthy people have been sentenced anywhere from 18 to life in prison simply because they're wealthy. All of their assets have been seized. All of our intellectuals have been put into prisons because they have been deemed as two-faced, meaning that they're not loyal to the Chinese government. Our religious, leaders have been put into the camps and prisons because they're religious, and the Chinese government are saying that they're extremists and that they're promoting extremism. Many of, more recently, the BBC, they leaked the Xinjiang police files, is what it's called. It has records of over 300,000 Uyghurs that were detained, and the photographs of over 2,800 of them. And these were obviously hacked. And what this shows is many of these people, from as young as 14, as old as 73, both. The youngest was a girl, the oldest was a grandmother. They've been sentenced to, prison simply on the charges of so-called terrorism and extremism, simply because, one, the girl learned how to, read the Quran. The older woman, she was telling her children not to smoke or drink. So that was a sign of extremism. And so she was a terrorist for telling her children to not smoke and drink, which normally is from a health aspect, that's something you shouldn't do. This is the case. Other people, they were all in there simply for having worked out, because even working out, trying to stay fit is seen as a terrorist activity in the eyes of the Communist Party and the Chinese government. Having traveled overseas, having talked to a foreigner, having, even a WhatsApp, app in your phone, all of these are excuses that the Chinese government uses. Owning a tent, owning a flashlight, having more gas in your car than you're allotted, more bread for your house than you're allotted. All of these things are why the Chinese government, are excuses that the Chinese government uses to sentence people to prisons and so this is all a lie. If that was truly the case, the Chinese government says providing our people with jobs, and that they're sending our people, especially our young men and women, out of Turkestan to work in slave labor camps across China, saying they're providing with jobs. Yet the Chinese government brings millions of Chinese colonists into East Turkestan, provides them with a lot of benefits, free housing. You can have more than 2-3 kids a sign-up bonus to settle East Turkestan, again under the same guise of, oh, we're providing jobs. If the Chinese government was really serious about providing people with jobs and easy tensions between the different ethnic groups, between the Uyghurs and the Turkic people and the Chinese colonists, they just stop sending more Chinese colonists, live in their own, stay in their own country and contribute to the economy that way. It's the same thing, but obviously out in 2013, and his Chinese dream is to create a homogeneous Chinese nation by 2035, and that's precisely what they're doing. Even in his recent he made the other day, again, emphasizing that we need to bring all these ethnic groups together as a homogeneous Chinese nation. Essentially, what they want to do is eradicate all the other different ethnic groups and just create only the Chinese.
It's unbelievable to me. Prime Minister Salih Hudayar is joining Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. We're a couple guys from New Jersey, Prime Minister. Let me just put it straight up. Like, what's their beef? The things that you're describing that the Chinese Communist Party is doing to the Uyghur community in East Turkestan. Okay, why target? It is curious to us. Why target the Uyghur community? Why target East Turkestan in particular? Like, basically, what's their beef with the Uyghurs? Because you think about it, there are many groups around the world. Okay, there are many groups in proximity to China, but China for a long time now has been really like laser focused on this community. Why is that?
Well, like with any colonial power or invaders, occupiers, they're when they occupy a land, in order to sustain that occupation, they have to give the local people that they have to either convince them to, work for China, or they have to assimilate them, and this is essentially what it is.
Just a quick interruption. I apologize, Prime Minister. You mentioned like if they want the land, is there something unique to East Turkestan as far as whether raw materials or anything like that unique to East Turkestan that makes it that arouses the covetousness of the Chinese government?
Yes, East Turkestan is about 1/5 of the current territories under the control of the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party. So it's a massive piece of real estate. Almost 3 times the size of the state of Texas. In East Turkestan, you have natural gas, oil, gold, uranium, rare earth minerals that are being 60% of China's oil and natural gas come out of East Turkestan. 80% of their electricity production that's powering all these major Chinese cities are coming out of East Turkestan. 90% over 90% of the cotton, 80 to 90% of the cotton supplies production in China comes out of East Turkestan. Over 50% of the global polysilicon production, which is used to make solar panels, is coming out of East Turkestan.
So what you're saying is that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party is doing to East Turkestan what Stalin did to the Ukraine. In other words, in effect, when Stalin collectivized the farms, steal all the grain, traded it over, traded on the world market for steel to industrialize the Soviet Union. Basically, it comes down to what it always comes down to: money. Sometimes, Prime Minister, we don't need to look further than that, or at least for what the motive is. All right. And it seems to be based on what you just described. Again, rich in resources, gold, cotton, oil, natural gas. Obviously, we know what the Chinese Communist Party is after, at the expense of the Uyghur, the Uyghur population of East Turkestan. If you don't mind, Prime Minister, I'm going to hand it over to Joe. We really want to try to get into as much as we can here. So, Joe Resinello.
Well, you talk about money. I mean, let's look at what's going on with the United States. I mean, the government of the United States, to be fair, has declared the Chinese policy versus, with the Uyghurs, a genocide. They said it, but they're not doing anything about it. Let's be honest. We do business there. You look at the MBA, you look at all the banking that goes on in China. I mean, we're doing nothing.
Hollywood.
Nothing. There you go. I mean, what could be done to stop this with regard to Americans? What can we do to bring awareness to this? Because to be honest with you, everyone, it's similar the way I look at it to what happened during the Nazi occupation of Eastern Europe. The concentration camps were there. Everyone knew what was going on. No one said a word. Maybe they were afraid, in fairness. But in this case, I think it's money driven. There's money to be made in China, and they're closing their eyes. No one says a word, and it's shameful. What are your thoughts?
This is precisely what's happening. I mean, it's been about 8 years since I started this campaign, and other than a few governments like the United States and a few parliaments across Europe condemning it as genocide, nothing more has been done. Condemnations are great. We're grateful for that, but there has been nothing meaningfully done. Yeah, there have been bills like the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which was put into law this past June, which would prohibit any goods that are suspected of being made from slave labor from originating from East Turkestan, from entering into the United States. But the Chinese government has a loophole around this. What they do is they relocate our young people that are working in these slave factories in East Turkestan to outside of East Turkestan into the other Chinese provinces and still continue to get away with it either way. So it needs to be, this is why I was trying to persuade policymakers. I said we need to do it on all goods that are made in China, that either you have to prove that your goods are not made with forced labor or slave labor, or if you can't prove that, then your goods cannot come into the United States. Or else the Chinese government is going to continue using this loophole. But again, there were many corporations, including Apple, Coca-Cola, Nike, among others, who lobbied against this bill, who tried to weaken it as best as they could to where it wouldn't necessarily impact their operations and their business interests. So yeah, you have companies, that are involved in this. You have companies like Volkswagen who are making, like they made, vehicles for the Nazi regime. They're making police cars for the Chinese regime that is engaging in genocide in East Turkestan. So this is absolutely nothing new. Even, for example, with the Build Back Better plan, the Biden administration, before they came into during the election campaign, they vowed that they would, push back against China in the strongest terms over the issue of the Uyghur genocide, against the Uyghur genocide. Yet they came to power and they haven't done anything meaningful. In fact, with the Build Back Better plan, they're focused on solar panels. 54% of the global polysilicon production, 50 to 54%, comes from East Turkestan. The main three largest, solar panel producers in the world, three Chinese companies, operate in East Turkestan. And this went from 2014 when the campaign started, it was 9%. East Turkestan made up 9% of global production of polysilicon. By 2020, it went up over 50% because of the forced labor, because of the slave labor of the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples. Yet the CBP, the Customs and Border Patrol, they blacklisted a bunch of companies, countries from importing solar panels into the United States, but they left off, these three Chinese companies, the three main ones that are involved in this. So it's like, who are you trying to fool? Every cent that we give to the Chinese government, they use that to engage in genocide. Even if we gave them a dollar, let's say they don't use the whole dollar. Even if they use 10 cents, we're giving more than just a dollar. We're giving billions, hundreds of billions of dollars a year annually just in trade with China. And they're using a percentage of that to engage in genocide. So essentially, we are funding the genocide of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan, and this needs to stop. The least that we as Americans can do is realize that it's in our interest to stop buying Chinese goods. One, from a moral perspective, fact that if we stop buying Chinese goods, we will. It's the least that we can do to oppose the genocide that they're doing. Secondly, it's from a security perspective, we're not giving money to a regime, to a country that has a clear goal to replace the United States as a global superpower.
Prime Minister Salih Hudayar joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. We're discussing China, the Uyghur genocide. You know the shame of it all, and then we're going to have to go to a break. I'd love for you to comment probably after we come back from the break. Is that you mentioned, or you implied that we need to have a little bit more awareness of what's going on there, right? And the shame of it is that we have a press that they don't dig into this either. This transcends political parties. Joe and I lean conservative, or we are conservative, okay? But the party we usually vote for doesn't do much good in this regard either, because everybody just wants to make money. Everybody wants to do business. Don't mess with the free market, blah, blah, blah. That's all you hear. But my larger point was about the press, okay? We have such a disgusting press in this country, okay? Because they pick and choose the atrocities in the world that they want to cover. And this is just an undercovered story. I don't care what you say. Yes, you do have to go to more conservative websites and publications most of the time to find out what's going on. Because our press, they're bought and paid for too, as far as we're concerned. Just as much as any other corporation that's getting fat and making money, NBA or whoever it might be, with the Chinese Communist Party, okay? The press is right there in bed with them, and yet they call themselves fair. We're fair, Prime Minister. I want your comments on that when we come back from the break. Salih Hudayar, Prime Minister of East Turkestan, joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, Veritas Catholic Radio Network. This is a very great conversation, and people need to hear it, particularly us in the Catholic community. So stick around. We have another segment. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Rossinello. We are way, way, way in the breach with Prime Minister Salih Hudayar of East Turkestan, a Prime Minister in exile. Am I correct in that, Prime Minister?
Yes.
We'll get into that in a little bit, too. We want you to let our audience know your efforts are. Let's unpack this a little bit more. Let's expose the truth as we are supposed to be doing here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Joe Rossinello.
Joe Pasillo teed up this next question on the other side of the break. Let's talk about the mainstream media. Clearly, they have an agenda. Why aren't they basically broadcasting these truths that you're speaking right now, particularly in the West, not just in America, but across Europe, in England, in Australia, in Canada? What is preventing them from speaking the truth? Is it influence from the Chinese government when it comes to money? I'm willing to bet it is. It's money driven, as Joe Basil rightfully said. What's your thoughts?
It precisely is. I mean, I've had this conversation with numerous, policymakers, both here in the U.S. and Europe and the U.K. This is precisely the problem. You have, this issue of elite capitalism. The Chinese have captured the elites, economically. They have grabbed them by the pockets, essentially, stuffing money into their pockets and buying their silence. And so many of these media organizations, they refrain from covering the full story, the whole thing. They'll mention, briefly a little bit, but nothing to where it will upset the Chinese government, because everyone is upset. Everyone is afraid of upsetting China because of the economic interest, the economic entanglement that they have found themselves in. And so simply it is about the money. The Chinese government, they're able to, put propaganda, in, Western, magazines, newspapers, denying the atrocities or whitewashing the genocide that's happening. Yet we can't do the same to counter that. It's shameless.
When you see all the evidence and evidence such as you're providing, and we know it's out there, and the treatment of these people, along with many others too, but in this particular case, like you said, Prime Minister, is like your Chinese are focused on the Uyghurs. But it just amazes me that we get shrill, like especially the American left. Okay, they get all shrill in this country because the Supreme Court just said that states could decide whether or not what their abortion laws are going to be, right? And they can't just kill their babies on demand, okay, because the Supreme Court says so. And they scream in the streets, and yet this atrocity that's going on, silence. I want to ask you this. Yeah, a lot of it, Joe Rossinello just and you supported what he said in that it has to do with money. How much of it is ideology? How much of it is the fact that many leaders in the world right now, and a lot of the mainstream culture in Western Europe and America, how much of it is because they happen to agree with communist ideology? Do you agree? I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong. Do you think that that's part of this?
I mean, I definitely think there is some aspects of ideology involved as well. I'll be honest. For example, here in the United States, the reason I'm speaking to you and not to some liberal host is the fact that you're even willing to even hear about this and let the world know about what's going on. Whereas liberals, unfortunately, they seem that some of, for example, the issue of 3.7 million babies being aborted, that's not a problem for them.
Well, sure.
As far as forced sterilization, that's not a problem for them either. Many of these aspects, it's not really a problem for them. They're like, okay, so what?
Yeah, and that's a shame of it. Is that it just smacks of all this elitism and yes, ideology and people just don't. I just don't understand how they could stick their head in the sands. Well, hopefully they won't for much longer, okay? And they understand exactly just how evil this is. Like, again, the people that rail about all the atrocities that have occurred, particularly in the 20th century and this and that, but they have nothing to say when it isn't one of their favored groups that's being persecuted. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go from here?
When we talk about the free press, I guess we have to also talk about big tech. I mean, a lot of people know who are listening to our voice that there is censorship in the United States. There are certain things you cannot say. To Joe's point at the beginning of the show, we have a social media platform, and there's certain topics when we do breach them, they suspend us for a week.
Quite frankly, Joe Rossinello, I'm sorry to cut you off. Prime Minister Salih Hudayar joining us in the front line with Joe and Joe. This will air on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, okay? And they can't mess with that. That's a radio station, AM and FM radio, okay? When we air this on our social media, this conversation, which I think is a great and enlightening conversation for people, this could get taken down from YouTube. There's no question about it. They don't want to hear this stuff. This might actually be Russian disinformation. I just want to throw that out there to you, Prime Minister. Sorry to jump in.
No, it's okay. I mean, I highlight that fact because we have been censored. And to be honest with you, they call themselves a free press, in the name of the truth police. I mean, we've even seen this in the Biden administration. He actually appointed somebody to, basically decipher what is truth and what is not. I mean, that to me doesn't sound like a free press, nor does it sound like America. If you ask me, that's my 2 cents. But how has big tech affected your plight? Are they communicating? Do they censor certain things? I'm sure, this is a way that people communicate nowadays in the world. How have they affected your means of getting your message out?
Well, as far as big tech, I mean, big tech is seen, promoting and propaganda. When it comes to, for example, President Trump, Twitter suspended his account simply because of allegations that, he led people out into the streets. Yet you have Chinese government accounts that are promoting genocide that are, still operating. You have, people from Hamas, from Hezbollah, and others who are promoting, terrorism that are still being able to use, big tech. So there's like a double standard here, essentially. And I feel like some of the things that we post, it's because everything's an algorithm, but at the same time there's something called shadow banning or something, stuff like that. Those type of things are happening. For example, on Facebook, we can't even post ads. Well, the Chinese government can post ads, but I, as an American citizen, I'm not able to post an ad inviting people to join a certain demonstration. Whereas the Chinese government, they can post ads every day that they want, all day they want, about denying the genocide, about how everybody's happy, about how Uyghurs are singing and dancing, and that there is no genocide and that Uyghurs are, quote, terrorists.
If there's one thing that Karl Marx said was true, he said history repeats itself, first as tragedy and then as farce. And that's exactly what's going on here. In other words, where like I said, all the tragedies that we're told we have to, cry over, and we do, Joe and I and you, Prime Minister. All right. I like to think that we try to adhere to a moral standard, and when we see atrocity, we want to speak out against it. And that to me transcends our differences as far as our individual religions. And yet it's farce. Because the same people that condone everything you're talking about, they sit at their galas in Hollywood and their symposiums, and they sip their Grey Goose and they eat their foie gras, and they think of themselves as the most virtuous people in the world. And yet they won't say a damn word. I want to expand on that a little bit. Prime Minister Salih Hudayar joined online with on the Veritas. Okay. Huang Ping. He's the consul general, China New York consulate, 2018, and he attended 25th annual China Forum at the Harvard Business School. Okay, share your thoughts on that. It's example. I don't want any Chinese dollars, which Harvard does, by the way. All right, talk about that a little bit.
Yes, I mean, and especially this consul general, he's made numerous, not only denying it, but whitewashing it and even promoting it, saying that China from counterterrorism aspect, and that they were civilizing our people and helping us develop, and not colonial. When you think of the left, immediately they be jumping on this, but instead, they're welcoming a bloodthirsty politician to speak and whitewash and manipulate the brains of American and other students that are listening to them. So we obviously, diversity in the United States not be doing this. It's like if we invite Nazis to speak. They're no different than the Nazis. What they're doing is no different. If Harvard inviting Nazis to speak, or some university started inviting a Nazi representative to speak about how they're not committing genocide, and and they're just doing a few things to a certain group of terrorists, and that's bad.
Well, you know what it is, Minister, and I'm going to hand it over to Joe Rossinello. The thing is, we're objective men. We look at these things and we judge them appropriately, regardless of ideology. So I don't particularly care what oppressive or murderous regime you're talking about. That's not. I don't care what people say. I really don't. Beyond, don't about like human. Care about don't me if you care about oppressive or repressive or murderous regimes. You don't. Yeah, you're right. Prime Minister, like they wouldn't invite, let's say, a Nazi, nor should they. But what you just did, they will deny, say, no, there's no equivalence between Adolf Hitler and the Nazis and, let's say, Xi Jinping and the current Chinese Communist Party. Why do we know that? Because they don't equate Hitler with Stalin and Mao. Joe and I are college-educated guys, okay? And you know what? I didn't hear about Stalin's crimes and Mao's crimes till I was well into high school. But I heard about Hitler's crimes early on. That shows you there's obviously an ideological agenda going on here too. All atrocities need to be condemned, okay? All these actions of these regimes, both in the past and currently, need to be condemned. And Harvard and any other American institution shouldn't be inviting murderers, because that's what they are. They're slave masters and they're murderers, to Harvard to go and get a damn award. Joe Rossinello.
It doesn't shock me, just to piggyback on that. I mean, the elites who run everything in this country at a school like Harvard, this is just typical. It's typical. And yet Americans want their children to go to these schools. Why? Because they're more concerned with achievement. They're more concerned with going to the Starbucks and bragging about Johnny or Sallie going to Harvard. This is not a pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful. And this is typical. And that's why we brought this up. I just wanted to say that because everyone aspires to have their child to go to one of these schools. And frankly, I don't think they're worth 2 cents. I just wanted to say that. But let's talk about another organization that's not worth 2 cents, is the UN. The UN, what do they do? I mean, this is the forum, if you ask me. There's atrocities going on all across Africa and have for the last century, speaking specifically in the Sudan, in Nigeria. Christians are being like there's issues. What's going on? Why aren't they speaking about it? They're not. And I'm interested in your comments.
Well, the Chinese government, they have seemingly cultivated and bought off a lot of the leaders, or elite capitalism all across the world, not just here, in the United States or in Central Asia or East Asia, but all over the world, especially through the Belt and Road Initiative. And this means also, the UN. After the United States, China contributes the most to the UN. About a decade ago, China's contribution did not even make up like 2%. Now it's well over 20% of the contribution to the UN. So using that, the Chinese government, especially by focusing so much on African nations and other smaller nations, by giving them predatory loans, asking no questions, the Chinese government has cultivated a large group of countries that will vote no matter whatever position China wants. They'll automatically vote on that. Even at like the UN Human Rights Council, for example, China's on the UN Human Rights Council. A regime that's engaging in genocide in the 21st century is on the Human Rights Council. Like it's like putting the Nazis on the Human Rights Council. Yet they use this to silence any criticism. The United States and a few European countries, they occasionally try to raise our issue, but China immediately tries to block it. The UN as a whole has been completely silent. In May of this year, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights visited East Turkestan for a few days and pretty much, towed the Chinese government line. They were supposed to have, released a report on the situation in East Turkestan for the past several years, and it kept getting delayed and delayed, and it's still delayed. There's no news of when this report is going to come out. The UN has, there's the UN treaty, the 1948 UN Genocide Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Every member of the UN has a treaty obligation to stop, to oppose and to stop genocide, yet none of them are doing that. And this includes the United States and the European countries who have, recognized it as genocide, but haven't done anything more beyond that.
Tell me about it. Prime Minister Salih Hudayar joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. He's the Prime Minister in exile of East Turkestan, and we are discussing China. We're discussing East Turkestan. We're discussing genocide. I don't understand, Prime Minister, for the life of me. And I'm going back decades. The UN has been an essentially useless organization from its inception. There's no other way to put that. You mentioned China being on the Human Rights Council. I think at one point, or maybe even still, I think the Sudan was on there along with Cuba. So it shows you, like, I don't understand how people of goodwill, anybody who's got their eyes open, doesn't look at the UN and say, really? Should this organization even exist? How about we kick them out of Midtown Manhattan? All right, shut down that building, sell it off for condos, okay, and back out of that organization, okay, because they're useless. If they can't address this, they're useless. Then they have no function. Let me ask you this. So obviously there's a rather large Muslim community in the world, okay? The Uyghur community is one of them, okay? What is the reaction of different Muslim countries, okay, to what's happening to the Uyghur community in China? What's their overall view? Particularly, let's talk about Turkey, Pakistan, but you could talk about other Israel. Like, what's their overall view of the Chinese Communist Party, or the communist regime?
Well, the overall view of the Muslim countries against China, on China, or on the issue of East Turkestan is, they're deaf, dumb, and blind. That's the simplest way to put it. When it comes to, the issue of Palestine, Kashmir, Syria, Afghanistan, any other Muslim place, they're all out in the streets. If someone was to even rip a piece of a Quran here in Europe or here in the US or any part of the world, you would have, all these Muslim countries, demanding, justice, condemning it. You'd have, Muslims across the world protesting it in the masses. But the Chinese government, they took every Uyghur's Quran, they took them, lit them on fire in the middle of the streets, took every religious object that they had, and still nothing from the Muslim world. They're silent. In fact, you have countries like Pakistan saying China is following, the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad didn't tell you to go, rape women. They didn't tell you to, say that there's no, we are God. And none of that. They didn't tell you to forcibly sterilize people. But it's all about the money. All these Muslim countries, they receive a lot of economic benefits from China. And some of the Muslim countries, they have close political ties with China. For example, China is very supportive of the Palestinian issue. They're supportive of other issues that they use to push back against the West, and to also get sympathy and bridge the gaps that they have with the Muslim community. So the Muslim world just essentially sells us out, and they are literally selling us out. So even after 2016, countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Turkey, other Muslim countries in the Middle East, they deported significant amounts of their significant amount of Uyghurs that were had sought refuge in those countries, and they know what they're doing. They know that those Uyghurs are going to be sent back and killed, but that's fine for them as long as they make some money from China. And so this is essentially the situation. You will never, for example, for the past 3 years, the mostly Western countries, mostly Christian Western countries, have been condemning China's atrocities that they're undertaking in East Turkestan at the UN. And you have about the first year it was like 36, then 45, then 47 this year, um, condemning it, and not a single Muslim country in that. This year, the only single Muslim country was Albania, which is in Europe. They were the
Right.
only country that was able to sign on to that letter condemning it. All the other Muslim countries completely silent. In fact, some Muslim countries, like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Iran, and others, China, put a counter letter at the UN General Assembly, praising its, one, denying the genocide. Secondly, praising it as, a counter-terrorism operation, just like how, Russia and Putin called its invasion of Ukraine a special operation or whatever, like that. And you have Muslim countries signing on to that, saying, "Oh, we praise China's counterterrorism efforts. They're doing the right thing. We should learn from China." So this is the sad reality of the Muslim world.
It's funny. I'm going to hand it over to Joe. We only have a few minutes left. Prime Minister in exile, Salih Hudayar, joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. It's really sad to see what's going on. It reminds me, I'm not joking either, but it kind of reminds me of the fictional character Spectre in the James Bond books, right? It's like Xi Jinping is sitting at the head of that very long table. And the Spectre's got, it's like an octopus. They have the tentacles and everything. They can buy off whoever they want. And I don't know why we continue to allow it. But hopefully we could do something. You're obviously doing it. You're out there. We're trying to speak out about this, to raise the consciousness, at least of the American people, to tell, at least start in America, start in the way you can. Start boycotting these companies that are doing business in China. Don't, hold Apple's feet to the fire, and Tim Cook and, all these people. Again, in our own small ways, aside from some larger things that we could do, and I'm sure you're that's something that you're kind of like boots on the ground when it comes to like really trying to, raise the awareness of this. But in our own small ways, we should stop, at least in our own lives, being complicit in this. And there's ways we could do that. With that, we have a few minutes left. Joe Resinello, where do you want to go?
Well, in this conversation, we talked about the UN, we talked about America, we talked about the press, we talked about big tech, we talked about the Muslim nations. And it seems to me, and I'm from New Jersey, and I'm going to break it down like a guy from New Jersey. China's a bully. They're a bully. It comes right down to that. They use their leverage financially. They use their might. They're not afraid to use physical force, and everyone backs down. Everyone backs down. But I'll tell you this, I believe in God and I believe in justice, and one day justice will be served. It's the way it works. It's the way of history, and there is no question about it that the truth will ring out as clear as a bell. There is no doubt about that. But with that said, let's talk about the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement. And what can people do, regular people from a grassroots level, to help your cause?
Yes, the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement is a nonprofit political and human rights movement, specifically advocating for an end to China's ongoing campaign of colonization, genocide, and occupation in East Turkestan, and campaigning for the restoration of East Turkestan's independence. Because at this rate, the Chinese government gave a 1955. We are a so-called autonomous region, but we've had no, the only autonomy we've had is to be sent to concentration camps, to be colonized, to be, sterilized, raped, forcibly aborted, and killed. And so, as an independent nation prior to the Chinese occupation, we feel that restoring East Turkestan's independence is the only solution and the only way that we can ensure our people's human rights, our freedoms, and our very existence at this rate. So that is what we are campaigning for. And as far as what average Americans can do, everyone uses social media. So we'd like everyone to follow us on social media at, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at ET Awakening or ET Exile Gov. To keep updated about what's happening, and people can volunteer in any ways, whether it's helping, whether it's like setting up some little info event at their local church or their local community center, or informing other students at their college. These are all things that we need to do. Pressing our lawmakers to take a stronger stance on these issues is other things that every American can do. Just sharing the information on social media, letting others, become more aware about it is the most basic thing, yet the most strongest thing that we can do and that we should do.
Well, the funny thing is, Prime Minister, is that, here it seems that in America, if you speak the way we do, our own government targets or at least describes us. I'm not going to compare what we go through as conservative Americans to what the Uyghur community is going through in East Turkestan. Okay. But we have views that our own government says if we hold certain views, we're terrorists. We're even if you're a parent yelling at a member of the school board, you're somehow a domestic terrorist. Certainly, you're a white supremacist. Absolutely a racist. Who are you to criticize China? You're a racist. They say, well, they're brutal murderers. Okay, they are the murderers of history. Okay, or amongst the murderers of history. And I'm going to speak out in this country. If you speak that way, you're a racist. You're deplorable. Okay. And you're all these things. So it's kind of sad that way. Real quick, we have about a minute left. How did you become prime minister? Some people might say, well, who made this guy prime minister? I'm not joking about it.
So our government in exile, every 4 years we have elections, parliamentary elections, and our parliament elects representatives, and then the parliament, our representatives, they in turn elect government. So following my success with the National Awakening movement in 2018, our people nominated a member of our parliament representing our diaspora here in the United States. And then our parliament felt that given my background, my language abilities, capabilities, what I studied, they felt that I had despite me being young, they felt that I was more able to represent our government's leadership. So our parliament elected me as the prime minister.
All right. Well, you have our support, Prime Minister, in any way that Joe and I can help you here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. And we certainly are very grateful that you've taken your valuable time to come on the show and spread the word to our audience and help us to let people know what's going on with this brutal, murderous, oppressive regime in China and different things that we could do, even if it's, like I said, in our own lives, to cut the ties and not support them in any way. So we want to thank you so much for joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you for the opportunity. God bless.
God bless you. And thank you all out there at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network for joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith in the New York City metropolitan area. Remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere.